What is racial fetishism and what does that look like for Black men?
It's like being taken to the hood without knowing you're going to the hood. You're like, I know how to speak the King's English.
I'm supposed to measure up to some sort of search item that you have on your Pornhub, on your XNXX, or whatever else we want to talk about.
This idea of this like aggressively strong, like sexually insatiable Black man did not start, on the app.
No,
like this is centuries old. It's that tired. This is Ryan, Will, and Cody here to talk about racial fetishism and how it works in the queer community and the stigma that's associated with it. So first off, my name is Ryan Womack. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I am a licensed social worker with a chemical dependency focus, and I work as a therapist at Equitas Health. Well,
and hello everyone. I'm William. I'm one of the other therapists at Equitas Health. My pronouns are he, him, his as well. And I have oh goodness, what am I? I'm a professional clinical counselor now because that title just changed. And I am a chemical dependency counselor assistant as well. And I've been with Equitas since 2019 now.
And I'm Cody Seaton. My pronouns are he and him and his and all that good stuff. And I'm on this thing with two therapists. Like, this is the weirdest threesome I've ever had.
we are so welcome to have you.
We are going to provide you with all the love, I promise
you. So let's just jump right into it. What is racial fetishism and what does that look like for Black men?
To me, I think I look at things in terms of the emotional toll that it takes, right? So when you're in the corporate world as a Black person, there's a tax you're paying in order to be in that space. And I also think in dating, there's also that sort of tax where, hey, like either I'm on this app and I'm just trying to find love, or I'm just trying to find somebody to connect with. And in the back of it is always this little bit of like, do you have a BBC? And you're like, I'm a Cancer and I like long walks on the beach. Can we start there?
Facts are facts.
Yeah.
Say, baby, when you're talking about that whole I'm a Cancer and I like long walks on the beach, that is a whole thing. Like, hold on, I am a whole human being. There are other facets to all of this.
and so much of the fetishism, like I live in Washington, D.C., so you're dealing with a lot of people who are coming from all over the country and the world, which is a beautiful thing. The other part of that is you're dealing with people who have never interacted with Black people. So they think that you are a porn category. You're like, hey, Latino is not a real thing. That is that is made up for porn. Don't refer to me that way because I'm not a porn star. But you have to know people in order to make them human. And I think that's where the fetishism comes in. It's a desire and also a misunderstanding about what that person is.
Are we not porn stars out here?
I mean,
because look, part of that whole racial fetishism part, that whole piece of like, I'm supposed to measure up to some sort of search item that you have on your Pornhub, on your XNXX, or whatever else we want to talk about. I'm supposed to be now part of your fantasy. And so there is that whole idea that, yeah, I am your porn star. I'm supposed to be this whole idealized image of what you have created because of the world that we live in for whatever reason. But it does put you in that space.
So you two have all sorts of initials after your names, right? and I'm and y'all like, I got these degrees, I earned them. Y'all are like Dr. Jill Biden, like you will refer to me by my name. And I get approached on apps all the time with sup, or people who, and I'm like, you would not talk to another white person that way. So why are you approaching me with like, how you day? And I'm like, you're a little too familiar right now. and like, it's okay to just talk to me like a regular person. But again, it's sort of like being taken to the hood without knowing you're going to the hood. You're like, I know how to speak the King's English. And we can do that too. We are the duality. We contain multitudes, guys.
Yeah, I really vibe with what you were saying about the big black cock myth being kind of this thing that has been so utilized in pornography. Of course, like it's being marketed at our expense because the majority of people who are running these porn studios and making money off of this do not look like us. And so, of course, like whenever I hear BBC in any sort of context, I automatically think, oh, so the most that you've ever learned about Black people is through porn.
Absolutely.
It's so limited. And the fact, like you said, the fact that someone's marketing this somewhere, I always find it interesting because let's all be honest here, like who doesn't look at porn from time to time? And the idea that when you go and look at the porn categories that they have created, and you're like, wait a second, what's this? This is a thing? Wait, hold on. And now, out of curiosity, you done clicked on it, and you're down, and you done went down a wormhole of, oh my God, this is a whole thing.
Yeah.
My Christian eyes.
You can look at the titles, and it'll say ebony, and I'm like, all right. And then if it's thug, I'm like, where are we going? Who produced this? It's sort of some of the usual suspects.
It is an immediate turn off. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Ugh, no.
Okay, I want to move on to
I'm not your everything, I'm not your bug.
I want to move on to some of like the I guess the larger characteristics that are also included in this stigma, this label, this idea of what queer black men are. So I have this really handy Venn diagram from Calabrese et al.
Oh, he got charts.
Yeah, we have charts. I was very excited to find this.
Yes. Okay. The
prepared.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, we have all of these stereotypes about gay men, black gay men, black men. And so they are very much distilled into this, what applies to gay men doesn't necessarily apply to all gay men, especially not black men, because black gay men are different somehow. So what things jump out to you?
What's jumping out to me immediately, so we're jumping into it a little bit. When I was telling you guys before about how the idea of what black men are and whatnot, and how it's perceived in larger cultures comes a lot out of the Black Moor movement, and how black men were seen from about the 700 ADs to I think it was 1492-ish, because it was just after the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade. For those who don't know, because I realize that we're having a conversation amongst each other as well as telling the folks out there who are watching this, there was the Black Moors who occupied a good portion of Spain for a little while from 700 to 1492 AD. And what was really interesting about them, because history has a way of leaving people out, right, is that they really did occupy a part of Spain that was Muslim influenced. So a lot of it was from out of the books of the Quran and Islam, and they brought a lot of great things that came along with like philosophy, mathematics, chemistry, etc. That like did this whole thing of they brought culture, y'all. They brought culture, like literally brought culture. And so there was this whole idea that when Christian European came down to this part of Spain, I think it was Cordoba, Spain, that it erased part of that history. But what they were trying to erase with the Christian European Spain was that they were taking away some of the freedoms that came along with being black folks in culture. And some of this, like when I'm looking at it, like the aggressively strong, that's how they were often seen. And that's when it was a threat to Christian Europe. So it's interesting looking at it from this aspect, because then I look at it from the gay man and I'm like, oh, well, is that gay man or is that white gay man?
Exactly right.
That's where I'm kind of like, ugh.
Yeah, and William, to that point, like when I look at this, the first thing I think about is how I encompass all of this, all of this. But what I get to show the world is a very small piece of maybe each area. And then ultimately, we're cast as all of these things that none of the things that would display Black men are anything that is anything less than aggressive, right? Like when can you be all of these things at once? The world doesn't really allow you to be.
That uncomfortable download at the top.
Yeah.
Freaking burn under my entire ass.
Okay, so Will, you made a great point about how the historical context has come to play, in that this idea of this like aggressively strong, like sexually insatiable Black man did not start on the apps.
No,
like this is centuries old. It's that tired. It's that old.
But that
We've
also
been carrying
means,
this around for decades.
I mean, but that also means it's sort of like when I read the book The Body Keeps the Score, about how we have all these things inside of us that are baked into the DNA. So, a lot of times I don't think people understand why something's a fetish or why they're drawn to something. And this is one of those examples of where that comes from.
Oh my goodness, yes. The whole idea and context that, again, it just started on the apps, it's so not correct. You need to look no further than Othello, Shakespearean, to see like how a Black man was put up to be this fetish, and it was written into a freaking play. Like, call it what you want to call it, but and this is general to the Black man in general, not necessarily the Black gay man. So how does that carry down the line of our lives? It's long, it's old,
Yeah.
it's tiring. I mean, Rosewood, for anybody who knows the history of Rosewood, I mean, that they burnt down the whole city because they were afraid that Black men were raping white women.
Yeah.
And
Come on.
when was Rosewood?
Oh, you asked me and I don't remember the dates. Oh, don't record me. Google
But
it.
speaking,
Google it, baby.
I mean, Rosewood, in very much the same way as Emmett Till, in that it's the fear of a Black man that will do that, and then you have this violence that sort of serves as, and will make an example. So we'll show you how hard we'll go to protect our white women, and sometimes white women will weaponize that, as they did in the case of Emmett Till, or they're wanting to be rescued, as in the case of Rosewood.
Yeah, Rosewood was May 14th, 1923.
Wow.
So
That's on brand.
I mean, what? I mean, what? Wait. 1923. So 98 years ago. How old was Cicely Tyson?
Yep, 90.
We have people.
And,
I'm just saying, we have people.
And Rufus Bridges is 66, to give context. So it's not, whatever people say, oh, it's history, it's like, this is not that long ago. Really isn't.
Typically is. So that's how.
all right, so how does this manifest in our day-to-day lives, the day-to-day lives of Black queer men? What does this look like? I mean, we keep discussing the apps. We keep discussing, what people have said to us in the past. Like, what does that look for us? Like, what was your first encounter with racial fetishism?
Oh, there's so many.
I know. I remember my first specific one.
Yeah.
I was in high school. I was a freshman or sophomore, I believe. My English teacher, first day of class, she introduces herself and she says, one of the things about her personality is that she likes her men like she likes her coffee, hot, Black, and strong. And this is a white woman saying this to me, to children in an educational setting. And I'd never heard that before, but I remember feeling very uncomfortable. And I remember looking at one of my Black classmates, and we're just like, yo, what is happening right now?
Oh. William is feeling a certain type of way.
I feel like I needed to put something on in class while I'm trying to learn some algebra. Mrs. Smith, I need you to hold your vagina back, okay?
Right.
Well, I have a lot of friends.
I just give this education.
I have a lot of friends that make fun of me because right around the time of the 2016 election, I decided to stop dating white people. Like, not that I was like, this is an edict, I'm never going to do it again. But there was that moment of like, okay, if I invite you into my home, and Black Lives Matter was starting to become a thing at that point, and you play devil's advocate. It's sort of like, like, if you're going to be in this house, you need to know everything that's going on. And one of my earlier relationships, one of my first like long-term relationships, was with a white guy, and we slept together for the first time, and we're just finished, and we're in the afterglow, and he's laying on my chest, and we're talking about what just happened, a little pillow talk. And he had friends who were in a interracial relationship, and he, without thinking twice, just goes, "So when can I call you a nigger?" And I was like, why would you want to?" And he says, "Oh, well, such and such lets his boyfriend, they call him that." And I said, "Well, such and such does not respect himself. But if you ever say that in my presence again, it's going to be a problem." And it just really highlighted for me how quickly in your intimate relationship that something violent could happen. I just never experienced anything like that. And I looked at him completely different after that, because it was sort of just like, you just brought this variable into the situation that I wasn't expecting you to.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because we've been talking about how these stereotypes manifest and how people have these certain expectations of us, but like bringing hate speech into it is a completely different, because it's that it says that, okay, well, we have reached this point where I don't think this boundary is necessary anymore.
Yeah.
When are you going to accept
that race play?
Yeah.
For me, it sits at this interesting intersection of, I am not going to yuck your yum. If that is your thing, is a form of race play, then that is your decision. Um, and in the same breath, we should be discussing, why would you think that it was okay to broach the conversation in that manner? Like, there's finesse and tact to everything, and that just didn't seem like the moment. Like not
Nah.
when you're laying in the afterglow.
Oh, no. Yeah, and instantly, and you also know, like, after you've popped your cork, you're automatically like disgusted by whatever just happened. So I was already like, you can go, really.
Yeah, in one of my instances, I did not even get to the afterglow. There were two instances where this came up in a sexual context, where one guy asked if he could call me a nigger. I mean, he said, "Can I use the N-word?" I said no. But then there was one time in particular where we were like mid sex act, and he says, "Fuck me with that nigger cock."
Oh.
So not only do we have the hate speech, but there's also the dehumanization, in that it's just like you're just asking for this part of me.
You're reduced.
Yeah, exactly.
Called you and was like, "Put your dick on the phone."
Oh my god. Oh my god.
What kind of text
reminds me of
messages
like
does your dick get?
reminds me of like the Usher confession, like
Oh,
my Lord.
humor is the only
Okay.
way you can get through some of this stuff. Oh boy. Ooh, that was.
You got
Bringing it back together.
self-deprecation is the best way.
Bringing it back together. Cody, tell us about your project.
Yes.
Tell us about Grinder While Black and how it kind of came about, and just really what it's all about.
Sure. So I started Grinder While Black about 3 years ago, but I'd like to think that the project is going on a little longer than that. I have been on dating apps. Well, I'm not on them now because of the pandemic, but when I was on them hard, there's multiple. I can count in my head at least five, and I would always at dinners with friends or drinks tell people, like, you would not believe what my experiences like on these apps, and I liken it to things like Facebook, where if you click on certain things enough times, your feed is going to be social justice, or it's going to be cats, right? but nobody's going to have the exact same experience. So whenever I would log on, it was men who would not even say hello. The first thing I would say is, BBC question mark, or, show me your dick, stuff like that. And I would screen cap it and I would share it with my friends, and they just couldn't believe, my friends who are non-black, they couldn't believe that that was the situation, right? Because they would say, oh, well, why are you single, or why haven't you been in a relationship all the time? And I'd be like, well, here's the thing. So I've been capturing it for a long time. And then I came up with this idea of putting together this Instagram called Grindr While Black. And I thought it would be interesting just as an educational project. I'm a show and not tell kind of person. And what I found from it was there are examples of how often I tried to laugh off what was happening, or ignore people. But what really surprised me, and also I try to really infuse humor with it, because it really, when you think about it, is pretty sad. But what ended up happening is so many people message me, in the DMs, or they're in the comments about, I'm having this same experience. And I think I would have stopped doing it a long time ago had it not been for that. A lot of my private messages are therapy sessions for people, or areas where they can vent. And I just didn't realize that as Black men, we didn't have that sort of community or that space. So if nothing else, I'm just glad to have that kind of space for us.
And where can you find your content?
Sure. So it's on Twitter at the Grindr While Black. It's also on Instagram at Grindr While Black. And there's a backup called GWB_backup, because people try to shut me down. So we have a couple of different spots where you can find the content. But I think very soon it'll convert to a website, which will have the same name.
So, I mean, you have all of these like primary accounts, like you're doing research, really. What are some common themes that come up, or common reactions that people who are, fetishizing Black men, like?
I think that the first thing is there's always this cognitive dissonance. People's profiles will say, looking for a kind, smart, compassionate human being to spend my life with. No Trump voters here.
Really?
That kind of thing. And then their first, if you didn't vote for Hillary, you can't talk to me. And then their first message would be big cock, or something that's related to being Black. And I think that some people don't see themselves as being problematic. And they also, I think, what I've run into many times doing this Grindr While Black, a lot of people don't know it's me, which is great. I have my regular photo up and everything. And I'm sort of like Erykah Badu about it, right? Like, I come in peace, but I mean business. So there are plenty of times where there are people who have sent messages to me like, come over here and fuck me with your nigger dick. And then I see them in a bar and they're quiet as church mice, and I'll approach them and be like, hey, like, maybe you'll talk to me like a human being now. But I find that it's what the central theme of Grindr While Black is the internet is so impersonal, and it makes people very bold. And the same people who would have that kind of demand online at 1 a.m. Are afraid of really encountering you in the street. And so I think that's a larger societal issue that, in the 70s, if you wanted to know what somebody was into, there was a hanky in a certain pocket. That's what down low was for all gay men. And now you have all these apps that are, down to scruff if you're a bear, and all these kind of like really targeted methods of meeting men. And people still don't know how to communicate, and they still don't know how to sort of consent. I find that a lot of the men on a lot of the messages in Grindr While Black start with somebody's like asshole, not an asshole person, an asshole like a literal butt.
Kind of comical.
Like, wow, like, you really just dropped the chocolate starfish on me, and didn't say hi. They just like they'll send their butt, and they're just like, that's their hello. You're just like, wow, okay. I mean, and again, sometimes I feel like a nut, sometimes I don't. I think that's the toughest part of it. Maybe I would be up for just hooking up with somebody, but when you start it out with like, you don't even exist, you're just a dick, it's a really hard place to start from.
Mhm.
So, from your experiences, because of how you are now collecting this content, because I've now had the pleasure of seeing it as well through Twitter, and I can see that we clearly have a community of folks who present in a very similar manner as us, the three of us. Um, do you feel, or have you observed that the people who tend to have this um, this discord with the people who are using them as a fetish, are you seeing more of it being a cultural misunderstanding between the person asking and the person who's asking, the person they're asking, or is it just that bold brazenness?
Uh, yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Like here in DC, you're gonna encounter people who moved here from Iowa or Kansas or Kentucky, right? So their proximity to blackness is much different. And then what's shocking is, because it's such a liberal place, is you have these people and you're like, I think that you're educated, but book smarts and street smarts aren't the same thing. So I think it's a weird intersection, especially the people who want to check the box, like I've never been a black person before. I really don't know. I personally feel like you can only meet people as deeply as they met themselves, and I feel like a lot of the men on these dating apps, they don't really know. They don't really know themselves, or they don't know what is motivating them to do some of these things. Aside, I my one of my favorite quotes is, "A hard dick has a soft conscience," and
Aw.
so I mean,
Very
so,
nice.
there's a way that you might behave when you're feeling frisky that you might not when you've cleared the pipes.
So I I found this really interesting study from Canada by Husbands et al. And it compiled the experience of a lot of men from who had come from different African countries uh, to Canada, and their sexual experiences with white men and black men. And so there was a significant number of participants who reported being receptive, bottom, or versatile in sexual relationships with black men. So they were more, versatile or bottom when they were with black men, but when they were with white men, they switched. And so this kind of comes to the conclusion that when you are like when you have to fulfill a certain role, you're not as fulfilled because a lot of these men in the survey were like, I mean, sure, it happened, but I felt closer to the black and brown men that I was sleeping with because I felt like I could be more myself.
Yeah, I'm
I
sure
imagine that to
there.
be sorry.
I'm sorry. No, I would imagine that there's a certain amount of policing, right? Like was telling a friend recently, I go to therapy, and it wasn't until I started going to a person of color that I was really honest. And I think you can be with somebody, but they only know you to a certain degree. And I think there's a shorthand when you date uh, someone of your own ethnicity or race. I think it's a beautiful thing to date interracially and to exchange cultures. I'm very torn about this, honestly.
I think it's a very large, interesting conversation because we talk about masculinity um, as if it's this siloed experience as a culture. And so we want to put definitions around what that looks like. And unfortunately, within our culture, um, there is a definition of what masculinity is supposed to be and what it looks like. I think that we're doing so much better as a country and as a culture here as Black folks in America with expanding upon that, so that way we can be more liberal with our sexuality and understanding that it's not this monolithic experience,
Mhm.
that we can do more than one thing. So to that extent, I can also see where it's problematic for me to say I want to give of myself to someone who's a representation of what actually hurts me. So maybe I'm limited in what I want to do because you are a representation of this oppressive system. I'm not bottoming for a white man. You, you,
Yeah.
you, there's a whole thought process that goes behind it, but I can see where that could be limiting to the extent that I'm not willing to do certain things. But I probably was with somebody who looks like me or someone who's also a racial minority, because there's some shared experiences there, because we might not have necessarily been offensive towards each other as far as the history is concerned in this country. So I'd see that.
I just wanted to add, William, to that degree. I feel like I haven't reached the apex of my sexual understanding of myself because of these limitations, right? Like you meet somebody and they're just like, "Oh, so you're a top, right?" And yes, but like if somebody wanted it, like I'd serve it up. But
Right.
nobody's asked me, so
You gotta work for it.
nobody's asked me. But what ends up happening is, I've been put into that kind of narrow box or that narrow definition of like, okay, when you get to bed, like you got to be masculine and strong. And there's been once or twice in my life, I'm like, I could be a little spoon, like I could do it, like if somebody offered, but I'm playing big spoon my whole life. So but again, it's sort of like the role that's been cast of what masculinity is, and I think sometimes that ties us up.
Okay,
That whole conversation, a little spoon, big spoon, is a whole another conversation, because when you're typically the big spoon.
Oh my God. So in rounding out our conversation, this Equitas project is about stigma and processing stigma and going towards healing. So how do we heal from this?
I think what we're doing right now is huge. I'm so fortunate to have a good a friend base of people of color to have those conversations with, and I felt very lonely years ago when maybe I was in more of like a white space and you're the outlier. But I have people who are Black and gay and male who I can talk to, and I think that helps to feel less lonely. And I think it's also like learning yourself and calling a thing a thing. I have a lot of friends who only date white men, Black friends who only date white men, and I don't know that they have ever investigated why that was. And then they're unfulfilled, or they get into these redundant arguments, and it's sort of like, well, are you where you need to be? And I think there's introspection. Introspection's a big part of this.
Absolutely.
See, Cody took the words out of my mouth
Oh.
in regards to being introspective. I think it's very difficult to know how you're going to give to someone's self if you haven't given yourself the chance to give unto yourself. And so I think it takes a lot of personal internal work, which sometimes requires you to go see a Ryan or a William. um, Sometimes it might mean having the spaces with friends like Cody was speaking of, where you can have those conversations amongst friends. Um, you really do need to do the work of, why are my behaviors, why are my steps ordered in the way that they're ordered, so that way you can be more intentional about your actions. And that is very paramount in regards of how you identify. I don't care if you're white, Black, gay, straight, whatever. You need to be in tune with who this person is, so that way when you're when you're putting forth efforts and doing certain behaviors, you're doing it with a certain amount of intention. So I think that's where you start. But having spaces where people can come together and have those conversations as well is also important, because if you don't have it, well, then you're sitting in a siloed experience, and that's not going to do you any good.
You both bring so much wisdom and experiences to this project, and I want to thank you both so much. We're out of time, but I want everybody watching this to keep the conversation going, and heal from the stigma. That's what we're here for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.